What a crowd. Thank you all so much for coming. This is amazing. I'm so glad you're all here. And of course, as always, we thank Jean Mummerts and Kathy Malinowski, our cookie ladies back there. And I think we introduced her before, but we have Alexa Polinari here. She's the event coordinator, so she's the one that makes this all go together. We have lots of other staff members, and maybe you'll kind of meet people as they leave. It would be lovely to introduce yourselves around if you have the opportunity. My phone is silenced. How about yours? Yay. Yay. We have not just the speaker to introduce today, but we have Jason here. And as you can see, he is an American Sign Language interpreter. And do you know it? You're just waving back to him. We are so glad to have him here, and this will be a regular part of our Brown Bag Lunch series. I think that most of you don't know his language, but please spread the word in case you do know somebody who would benefit from his work. Alex is so very sorry to not be here today, but she is in Washington advocating for the Massey Museum, for all museums, and for the arts. She's on Capitol Hill, so we're very proud of what she's doing today. Okay, I'm going to run through a few of the fabulous things that are happening at the museum. Do the Mew on Saturday, March 1st, 12 to 2. It's free. It's a workshop, all ages, and they're going to do cyanotypes. Those are those wonderful little blue sheets of paper that you lay a leaf or a key or something on. I love doing those. So that's free. Bring friends. History discussion group on Tuesday, March 4th, 10 to 12. Mandy's the new moderator, but Chris is just always there for backup. And that's because it's such a fun group. And it's not a group, it's just, they call it that. But you can come once, you can come a million times, whatever. Free, of course. And this the subject this time is what do you collect? So bring something that you collect, or a photo of it, or come and talk about it. Poetry open mic is on Saturday, March 15th at 2:30. You can read or recite your own poetry, or just read or recite something from an author you love. You're going to all stampede upstairs at the end of this program because Logan Carr over here, he's our new curator of football heritage, has put together the legendary turf exhibit, and the coolest thing, the centerpiece, is Paul Brown Tiger Stadium in Legos. It's big and it is so cool, so you have to go up there. And then later this month, on the 22nd, we'll be opening the Sight Unseen International Photography by Blind Artists, and the same day, Emily Olsluzik, I knew I would mess it up. Emily is having a show, not our Emily. It's called Playdates, and so those both open on March 22nd, and there'll be a free public reception on April 5th for those. And now we're ready to meet our speaker. Michael Weinstock has been with Spring Hill Historic Home and Underground Railroad site since November of 23. Site manager Kathleen Bachtel, who is hiding over here by the window, and our own Mandy Stahl, who now chairs the board at Spring Hill. They are really bringing our treasured historic site to life, so keep an eye on Spring Hill. Michael oversees tours, field trips, and educational programming at Spring Hill and off-site. Through the training and workshops that he leads for docents and volunteers, he ensures that Spring Hill is appropriately presented, and we are really happy to make sure we're doing history right. To enrich the legacy of the Roach Wales families in Spring Hill, he conducts independent research on topics related to Spring Hill, like agriculture, Kendal, Quakers, the Underground Railroad, the American Civil War, and World War I. With an undergraduate degree in history and a master's degree in information and library science, focusing on cultural heritage and informatics from Kent State University, Michael has 5 years of experience with museum tours, education, and curatorial work. Let's welcome Michael Weinstock.
Well, thank you, Margie, and thank you to the Massillon Museum for allowing me to present this topic today. Talking to Mandy or to Kathleen or anybody who's talked to me at Spring Hill, I'm very passionate about this topic. I'm very interested in the early days of Massillon, the early days of Kendal, and why it's all here. So welcome to historic Spring Hill, one stop on the road to freedom. So, as Margie already introduced me, my name is Michael Weinstock. I'm the Education and Outreach Coordinator at Spring Hill, so I'm in charge of tours, programs, and field trips. So before we get started and talk about the Rotch family and the Wales family, we need to talk about why the local Underground Railroad. And we're going to start by talking about the slave trade. There we go. So the transatlantic slave trade was established in the 15th century in Portugal. Now, slavery as the institution has existed since time immemorial. But chattel slavery, the slavery that we know in America, can be traced to the 1500s or even earlier in Portugal. And it's actually said that many of the beautiful monuments in places like Lisbon were actually made by slave labor force. So, slavery. At first, it was seen as a type of indentured servitude, but eventually it turned into the slave force that we know today. Everybody knows. In America, the first time that we saw slavery was when the White Lion, which was an English slaving ship, arrived in Jamestown in 1619. Now, interestingly, even though that's 1619, and that's a British colony, by 1833, the British Empire had outlawed slavery, which making Canada a free state. And that's going to come here very quickly. Now, America is not a free state at this time. You know, think of Virginia, think of the Founding Fathers. Many of them are slave owners. Many of them participate openly and make a tremendous amount of money on the institution of slavery. But you know, Canada is right above the United States, and Canada is a free state. So, almost immediately after becoming a country, people wanted to get out of the institution of slavery, which the Fugitive Slave Act of 1793 was passed by Congress and signed by President George Washington, which laid the foundation for the Fugitive Slave Acts. So the Fugitive Slave Act of 1793 laid out provisions regarding freedom seekers, which is the most current and up-to-date terminology. You could also heard the term, fugitive slave or escape slave, but a freedom seeker gives them agency. This is an enslaved person seeking freedom. They're not just a chair, they're a human being. They're very important. Well, as you can see in bullet point 3, almost immediately after the Fugitive Slave Act of 1793 was passed, there was widespread resistance against it. For example, on the right here, there are actually wanted ads, and some of them, these date from the 1830s, but these are from the Canton Repository. Again, I didn't know that until you start doing research and you go, oh, it's in the backyard. Now, again, we're going to see the other side of it here in a little bit, but note that there were wanted ads in Canton. Well, again, with the Fugitive Slave Act of 1793 being so widely disliked, the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 was enacted and signed into law by President Millard Fillmore in 1850, which really strengthened the restrictions. It made it a federal law, so now you can have federal agents coming after you. And in addition, compared to 1793, the fine is over $1,000, and it's 1850 money, remember that. It also levied harsher punishments for freedom seekers themselves and for anybody who would aid them. Now, obviously, people are still going to escape. People want to get out of it. People want to get out of chattel slavery. These are people, not property. As you see in this map, any way you can get away from slavery is appropriate. Now, we're going to talk about this circle in detail. But note, you can go that way, you can go that way, you can go that way. However you get away is correct, but just get away. Now, again, highlighting that little circled area, we're going to talk about Ohio specifically and their routes to freedom. Now, freedom seekers, remember that's the term we're going to use, would cross the border into Ohio via the Ohio River. They would then seek assistance from various communities around here, which were often Quaker-led. And remember that, Quaker-led. Freedom seekers, the ones I'm going to be highlighting, would then come up, basically think of Route 77, going through Marietta and up to Kendal. Well, what's Kendal? We're going to talk about Kendal here in a minute. Now, those who would be in Kendal or Massillon, two separate communities, would then head north to Hartville, Akron, Stowe, Hudson, and Cleveland. Generally, the end goal for a freedom seeker would be the Port of Cleveland, whereby even early 1820s, there were sympathetic steamboat captains who were more than happy to accidentally help somebody running away across Lake Erie to Upper Canada, which is contemporary Ontario. Again, any way works, but in Ohio, this is international. Once you're here, it's all over. Now, Massillon, specifically, that little star, I apologize, was very, very abolitionist. There were meetings with high-profile abolitionists such as Frederick Douglass, William Lloyd Garrison, and Lucretia Coffin Mott. So, for example, this is a great anti-slavery convention in those same kind of newspapers that would have had the wanted ads talking about who was going to be here in Massillon on Tuesday and Wednesday, the 1st of September. And this is an excerpt from August 13th, 1847, talking about who is going to be here. And this is a portrait of Lucretia Mott, and this is a portrait of Frederick Douglass. These were done by Abel Fletcher, and I know Mandy, we like Abel Fletcher.
And I do have to say that
Yes.
we don't actually own that photograph, which I'm very sad about, but it was loaned to us by Lithgow Osborne, a descendant of the Mott family. So it was taken here in Massillon, and I wish we had it, but we don't. So
That's still cool that it happened here, though, even just to see that it had happened here. So, taking it a step further, if you see UGRR, that stands for Underground Railroad. So besides just being active, there were people that took it a step further, and they themselves acted as conductors for the Underground Railroad. Now, this is a list that was put together in 1898, and this is not exhaustive, but these are some of the folks within the communities of Massillon and Kendal. Again, we'll talk about the distinction in a little bit, that participated on the Underground Railroad. Now, two people I like to highlight is the man on the left is Jehiel Fox. He's quite a character. I'm a big fan of him at Spring Hill because I work in the farmhouse. Well, it's never going to be verified, but we're pretty sure he was the one who designed and built the farmhouse. So thank you. And we'll talk about this very briefly, but he was actually the president of the Kendal community, which was an Owenite experiment, which was a utopia that was in Kendal between 1826 and 1829. That's its own talk on itself. It's a very, very interesting idea to have a utopia here. But he was president. And then the man on the right, I love his picture. That is Robert Folger. He came to Kendal with his family in 1813. And his claim to fame, among many, many, many accolades, is that he was the mayor of Massillon in 1861, and then between 1864 to 1866. Now, he participated on the Underground Railroad, and he also hired freedom seekers to work for him within Massillon. So, for example, he hired a man named Jerry Clemens, who I'm a fan of and who we're going to be talking about, to work at his hotel, which was the Commercial Inn. But the big person we're going to be highlighting today, I don't know if you can see, but he is bolded. We're going to be talking about Thomas Rotch. Now, if you've never said his name before, it's spelled R-O-T-C-H. It is enunciated R-O-A-C-H. I know, because there's a street called Rotch. So, this is from Isaac Russell, who was another big player here in Massillon. He wrote this to Thomas Rotch in 1816, talking about the institution of slavery. And it says, "I can have little satisfaction in remaining long in this state when abominable slavery is tolerated with all its evils, evils which I witness with disgust and dismay." Now note, this is 1816. So we're still talking about the 1793 Fugitive Slave Act. But let's talk about the Roaches. Who are the Roaches? Here they are. This is Thomas Rotch. He is born in 1766 on the island of Nantucket. The Roaches are fabulously wealthy on the island of Nantucket. As you notice, they have a counting house. Well, they participate in many, many industries, such as bricks, rope, candles, too, a little bit, but their big claim to fame is spermaceti oil. Well, what is that? Well, if you think of pre-electricity and you have lanterns, sperm whales, their oil, their fats can be burned. And they burn very, very bright, and they burn very, very clean, which is always something interesting when you read these old records. That's one of their selling points. Our lights don't stink. I know it's weird to think you turn these lights on and it stinks, but theirs, which this is an example of a whale oil lantern, does not stink. Now this is at Spring Hill, and this is an educational piece, so we can touch this. But it burns bright, and it doesn't stink. Now, the Roaches are very well liked in their community, not only because of their leadership role, but because of their religious and philanthropic views. You see, the Roaches belong to the Society of Friends, known as Quakers. So they had some pretty radical beliefs, those Quakers did, such as tolerance and equality. Now, the Thomas Rotch, being born in 1766, is actually going to grow up during a time when he's going to see that there isn't going to be tolerance and patience and anti-war sentiments, because he is actually going to grow up during the American Revolution. And interestingly, he's connected to it, kinda, because 2 of the 3 ships that are attacked in Boston Harbor are actually owned by his father, William, and managed by his uncle, Francis. So it's just kind of cool that we have a connection here without any ocean. It's estimated that his father, William, and the Roach whaling firm lost about $1 million due to shipping lanes being disrupted during the American Revolution. We'll come back to him. I'm now going to introduce you to the lady on the right. That is Charity Rodman. She is born in 1766 in Newport, Rhode Island. Now, the Rodmans are mostly known, amongst many things, because they're very industrial as well and involved in everything, but what I focus on is Rodman Candle Works. Again, lighting. Now, the Roaches and the Rodmans, even going back to the 1760s, intermarried, and they also worked together many, many times. Now, Charity, additionally, growing up in the American Revolution, is going to see not a shipping lane be destroyed, but Newport, where she is from, was actually besieged by the British, and many of it was burned to the ground. Much of it was burned to the ground. Now, upon their return, after staying in Massachusetts for a few years, the Roaches and the Rodmans, both families, kind of rebuilt what they were doing prior to the American Revolution. Now, they probably knew of each other because of the 2 families working and marrying for many, many years beforehand, but that is around the time that we believe that Thomas Rotch and Charity Rodman officially met. They are married May 6th, 1790, at the Quaker Yearly Meeting House in Newport, Rhode Island, which still stands and looks like a big barn if you ever want to go. That's the style. The first thing they do is they actually go back to the island of Nantucket for 6 months, which is Quaker custom, and to kind of get their feet off the ground. After 6 months, they decide that they're going to move onto the mainland to a place called New Bedford. Thomas Rotch has fully joined his father's whaling firm, counting the money, and is about to become tremendously wealthy. They are going to have one son, and his name is Thomas. Now, we call him Tommy at Spring Hill to distinguish him from his father. Now, little Tommy, born in the summer, dies by the winter. He dies of something called quinsy, which is a severe form of infantile tonsillitis and is oftentimes fatal. The following year, 1791, Charity Rotch is actually going to get a vaccine for smallpox that isn't going to go so well. Those are in the days when it was almost experimental. But she tried it, but she did catch smallpox because of it. She will survive, obviously, for the rest of the story. But from here to the end of the story, I want you to just think in the back of your mind, she is going to be chronically ill for the rest of the story. And I know we're still at the beginning of the story. Now, around 1800, Thomas and Charity Rotch in New Bedford, Massachusetts, decide, you know what? I don't know if we're going to be doing this for much longer. The whaling firm. It may have been because Charity Rotch missed her family. It may have been due to grief because of the death of their son. It may have been just let's get a change of scenery and kind of expand our horizons. But Thomas and Charity Rotch decide in 1800 they're going to move to a new bustling community that's also looking for people to grow the Quaker congregation called Hartford, right here. And while in Hartford, Thomas Rotch is going to get very involved in the community's affairs, and one of the things he is going to get involved in is the production of textiles, specifically with wool. You see, the United States around this time, so 1800, is going to start into something called merino mania, where merino sheep that come from Spain are very expensive. And the wool they produce is very luxurious. So everybody wants it, but there's not a lot of it. Taking it a step further, in 1807, Congress passed the Embargo Act, forbidding any foreign goods to come into America. But, you know, I still want my luxury goods. And Thomas Rotch, I'd say he had a light bulb above his head, but probably had a candle. He told Charity, I think I'm going to get some merino sheep, because why should I just be part of it when I can do it all? He is going to purchase 2 merino sheep and a ram, but by the end of our story, which we're not going to go into giant detail for, he is going to have a head of over 408 merino sheep. It's a lot of sheep, isn't it? But you know there's a problem, because at the same time that he's starting to take the merino business off and it booms, Charity Rotch catches something called spotted fever. What's spotted fever? Well, we can compare the conditions to the bubonic plague. And she's also starting to write in her journals that there's a little block of ice in my breast. That's going to come back. So, Thomas and Charity, being well off, can go to every doctor they've ever wanted to go to. And one of the doctors that was recommended by their physician, Eli Todd, in Hartford, was, why don't you go down to Philadelphia, where I want you to meet with this guy named Benjamin Rush. That is Dr. Benjamin Rush, Declaration of Independence. Again, see their circle. And among some wild remedies such as blistering, bloodletting, and brandy, which is medicine. That's right, you bet. He recommends, how about a change of scenery? Oh, okay. Well, Thomas and Charity think about it. Well, where would you recommend? How about somewhere south, like Virginia, or even go further south? You know, Charity, you don't ever have to deal with winter anymore, which is just going to make, add problems, having a cold perpetual breeze. And you know, Thomas, you're talking about expanding this merino sheep farm you keep talking about. Why don't you go down there? No. They absolutely say no. Because remember, they belong to the Society of Friends, even from the beginning of the story. They are Quakers. They outright reject the institution of slavery. In 1809, Thomas Rotch takes it a step further so he can help take care of Charity, as he hires himself a farmhand to foreman to friend. And his name is Arvine Wales. Wales Road. Told you the names are going to come back. He's 24 when he is hired, and his job is just to take care of the fences and the miscellaneous. But pretty soon, it's pointed out that he is really good to take care of Thomas Rotch's ever-growing flock of sheep, which will become Arvine Wales' role. But Charity is still sick. So, in the winter of 1811, they decide, we're going to do it. We're going to go. They, if you can see where my pointer is, are up here in Hartford. They then come down here and enter the state of Pennsylvania, where they go to Philadelphia and kind of restock and refresh themselves. They then go this way because they had heard about this really new cool place called Ohio. They then enter Ohio, right around here, where you have Wheeling, Virginia, Mount Pleasant, around that area. They then go down to like Chillicothe and then to Cincinnati, kind of scoping out the area. They then make a turn and go back. Now remember, this is horse and buggy and carriage. Well, right about here, they stopped at a place called Mount Pleasant, where they met with a man named Bezaleel Wells. And Bezaleel told them, hey, if you keep going up in this way, you're going to run into a little community I started in 1805. You may have heard of it. It's booming. It's called Canton. We have about 200 people. It's pretty good. And you know, up there, this is really nice land called the Plains of Sippo. And a lot of the area around the Plains of Sippo is already clear. There were indigenous peoples that use it for hunting. Okay. And you know, there's these big rolling hills and water. And Thomas Rotch is interested. So he tells Bezaleel, I'm interested. And he comes up here. And he sees these big rolling hills. All of this water. There's a lake over here on this side of the hills, Sippo. There's a creek, Sippo. And then over on the western side, there's this river that goes everywhere, the Tuscarawas River. And you know, it's very fertile. And in these hills, there's some bonus. There are actually some springs in these hills, or sources of water. And again, Thomas Rotch had the light bulb moment. He is going to purchase about 5,600 acres from Bezaleel Wells and from the Steubenville Land Company. Now, he purchased it for $2 an acre. Well, hey, I know it's a deal, but that's also in the day when I'm paying you in cents and in apples. Now, he's actually very mad because after he made his purchase from the government, they changed the price to $1.50. Well, by the spring of 1812, Thomas Rotch had constructed a pretty rudimentary log cabin where Spring Hill is today. And on April 20th, 1812, he is going to plat or lay out the community of Kendal with 102 lots in 1812. To the right here, this is Thomas Rotch's original plat map. And this is currently at the Massillon Public Library and is in the Rotch Wales papers to be safe. Now, Kendal is fertile, has farms, has land, and it's very attractive. So many people who were escaping the War of 1812 would come into the community of Massillon, such as the Folgers, remember who I talked about. So 45 more lots were added in 1815. So we go from that, and after this is over, you're more than welcome to see it. In the back are the additions to Kendal with 45 more plats. Big city. Now Kendal, here, and here, are going to be part of a merger into Massillon when the town was incorporated into a village and then into a city in 1853. Here's Massillon, West Massillon, and Kendal. Massillon has the downtown and the canal, so Kendal goes into Massillon. But within Kendal, going back a little bit, Thomas and Charity decide, I don't really want that log cabin anymore. We did leave this cold New England weather to come here somewhere warmer, but a log cabin, I don't know. So they decide that they are going to build their dream home. And this, Spring Hill Farm, this is their dream home. This was the one that was designed and likely built by Jehiel Fox. Now, at Spring Hill, their big commodity, and the reason they came here by carriage, Arvine Wales walked here, he shepherded 400 sheep 600 miles, was because of that livestock I talked to you about. I wanted an excuse to bring these. But they are going to start raising really merino sheep. And they are going to do it from the beginning, when it's the raw wool, all the way to finished textiles. Because Thomas Rotch is going to build a wool house. And within the community near the Massillon Reservoir, he is going to build a woolen mill. So I can take it from sheep to shirt. All the way. Now, later generations are going to get involved away from merino mania and more into dairy, which is why I have the cow and the milk bottle. And that's really past our story where I'm talking about today. But again, the dairy industry is an additional industry that was at Spring Hill Farm in the later years. Again, very, very industrious people. Now, besides their business ideals, they did bring their philanthropic and religious ideals with them, and those Quaker ideals. Well, what's a Quaker? Well, Quakers are a Christian movement that arose in 17th century England by George Fox, right here. He was the leader of the Friends movement. Now, again, that's pretty radical, one of their ideals, because they believed that everybody had the ability to experience the light or to see God within them. Again, everybody. No ups or downs, no questions. Now, Thomas and Charity immediately started getting enough people within Kendal to form a preparatory meeting, and they also served on yearly meetings when all of the different communities come together for the aid and emancipation of slaves. Again, freedom seeker who would they be going, but he just wants to end it however he can. Quakers are anti-war and anti-slavery. Now, this is the Quaker Yearly Meeting House, which was established in 1814 down in Mount Pleasant, which is where many of the yearly meetings would be. And I like the name of this because it's Mount Pleasant. I was doing research. Its original name when it was founded was Jesse Bobtown. And quickly they said, we're not going to Jesse Bobtown. How about Mount Pleasant? But that's the idea, and these are their meetings, and these are their ideals. So Quakers, especially Thomas and Charity, being very business-minded, into commerce, still are within restrictions, and, they have parameters. So, for example, Quakers, they protest slavery. They outright protest it from any business or even any venture that profits from enslaved people. So that includes things like sugar, cotton, and tobacco. None for me, please. Because remember, those are slave industries. But Thomas and Charity Rotch are very, very well off, and they do entertain people at Spring Hill. So it is said that they actually took up beekeeping, and there are beehives in the attic of Spring Hill to this day, not operational, to protest the use of cane sugar, since cane sugar comes from the Caribbean, where the Roaches, and especially the Rodmans, who actually have connections down there prior to Charity, they knew that these conditions were especially brutal. And Charity Rotch actually kept a selection of poems on her, one of which was titled On Sugar, talking about the brutal conditions and how she outright rejects cane sugar. Now, what else did they do? Well, besides just protesting and being against the institution of slavery, they actively helped people getting out of the institution of slavery. So we have a couple of documents at Spring Hill that we're very proud of, one of which is this. This is the George Duncan letter. Well, who's George Duncan? Well, George Duncan was a teenage freedom seeker who came to Spring Hill in early 1820. He was given refuge, he was given safety, and he was given directions to continue on his way. Remember I said going up towards Cleveland. Yes. Well, once he had made his way up a little bit towards Bainbridge, so going towards Chagrin Falls way, towards Cleveland, remember that's your end goal, he wrote Thomas Rotch a letter thanking him for his hospitality and warmth, and he revealed to him, I know that I told you my name was Jack when I was at Spring Hill. My name is George. He then continues talking about, Thomas, you've given me hospitality and warmth, thank you, but there's this other teenager coming your way too, and her name is Edie. E-D-Y. And he asked Thomas Rotch to help Edie meet him safely in Canada and avoid this guy named Samuel Spriggs. Now, Samuel Spriggs, we believe at Spring Hill, was actually George Duncan's owner. And doing research, you can visit his plantation to this day. It has actually been turned into an amusement park. And there's a joke in there. Now, interestingly, since I'm in charge of educational programming, I do a lot of tours. And we actually had a tour within the year that they told me, oh, we're from that part of Virginia. He's a great guy. Oh, let me talk about this. So that was kind of awkward. But it was interesting to see both sides of the conversation. Now, we have the George Duncan letter. Now, it is also part of the Roach Wells papers, but we have it transcribed at Spring Hill. I don't have the voice to give George Duncan a voice, but it has been transcribed and it is in the back corner, and you're more than welcome to read it in its completion. It's a very interesting letter. Number 2. Besides people writing to Thomas, we also have Charity, writing to her sister, Anna, about it. So Charity really wanted to assist just the same way Thomas did, and she likely did. But remember, she is very fragile, and her medicine are things like bloodletting and brandy and opium, so you're not going to do so well. But she still wants to help, and it really, really bothers her that she can only help in a limited capacity. So she wrote to her sister in 1821, whereas that was 1821, and she writes, and I can read this, "Night before last, we had a consignment of 2 Negro men and a little boy fleeing for their liberty to Canada. Poor things. They excited so much sympathy and so prey upon my feelings that I should be glad to have but little of their company. After provisioning, we posted them away and were truly glad to be released so soon. We provided provisions to last them to Painesville if they are only prudent. A very tragic trait in the character of a free person is the circumstance of the poor Negroes in this land, but I fear they will not be much better off in Canada." Again, Charity is very stuck. So those coming to Spring Hill, they would seek refuge either in the farmhouse, which we'll talk about, or in the spring house. Now later refuge, they would hide in the spring house. In the farmhouse itself. That's the spring house to the farmhouse. There is actually a secret set of stairs that leads up the back that people could hide, where they would keep that sugar, where they keep the honey too. So, quickly touching on this, in 2018, a Network to Freedom grant gave the National Park Service, enabled Spring Hill to do research into the connection Spring Hill has into the Underground Railroad. So remember, I was talking to you about the anti-slavery bugle. Well, in Arvine, Wales, his obituary in 1854, he is mentioned as a friend of the slave. We also have a little interesting story that in 1820, there was actually a slave catcher that came to Spring Hill Farm who was chasing 2 children, a woman and 2 children. Now, the story goes that the camp handed Thomas Roach a warrant for the slave's recapture, and remember, told him about that Fugitive Slave Act. Well, we'll never know what officially everybody said, but Thomas Roach is a Quaker. He doesn't fight. Arvine, Wales is not a Quaker, and he's got shears. Now, we'll never know what all those men said, but all we know is that the camp left empty-handed. So, after Thomas and Charity, Arvine, Wales is going to purchase Spring Hill Farm from the Roaches and Rodmans in 1829, as Thomas and Charity passed away in 1823 and 1824. Well, he continues the abolitionist movement and actually joined the Liberty Party, which is an anti-slavery and pro-abolition party. There were many, many chapters, and Arvine, Wales was the only Massillon representative. He would operate Spring Hill Farm until 1854, and his son, Arvine Chaffee, would continue the idea and actually openly oppose that Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. Now we're just going to quickly talk about freedom at last. And this is the guy I was talking about. This is Jerry Clemens. So many freedom seekers, including good old Jerry, he's one of my favorites, found refuge in communities like Kendal and Massillon. Jerry Clemens was actually a formerly enslaved person who came to Kendal, Massillon, in 1827 and was hired by Robert Folger, remember the guy at the very beginning, and worked at his hotel, the Commercial Inn, as manager. Very cool guy. There's another thing you can do. There's another way you can get out of the institution of slavery, and that is called manumission. So manumission was the legal act of releasing a slave, and could happen to various factors, including economic changes. So think of industries, cotton, tobacco come and go. An agreement between the parties, after you'd worked for me for 20 years, you're done. Or for other reasons, such as death. And these are two manumission documents that are here at the Massillon Museum, and just talk about, to whom it may concern, and this is talking about, once I am deceased, you're free to go. So there is a legal way to do it. And with that in mind, lastly, I'm going to talk about this guy. I'm doing more research on Jacob Gaskins. He's very interesting. So Jacob Gaskins was born into the institution of slavery in Winchester County, Virginia in 1793, and he was willed his freedom upon the death of his owner. Remember that manumission. So he came to Stark County in 1817 and actually became a successful and respected horse farmer. So he actually opened his 375-acre farm to freedom seekers with his Quaker wife, Hannah. You see how the story kind of restarted? So Gaskins, coming here, was actually one of the first black settlers in this area, and was actually the first to vote in Plain Township. And again, this area was very, very radical, because by 1820, there were a total of 23 free blacks residing in Stark County and working within the community. Now, I could go on for hours and hours and hours, and I probably could, but I do want to say thank you for allowing me to present this brief overview of Spring Hill, one stop on the Underground Railroad.